Hi, my name is Caroline Poland, and I'm the founder and CEO of Poland and Associates Consulting. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about what the window of tolerance means for those of you who are athletes. Have you ever been out on the field and found that your mind just kind of goes blank, or you're out on the court and you get so angry that it's just hard to think straight? Or maybe you can't let go something that someone said earlier and that's beginning to mess with your focus. Maybe you step up to the ball and your heart is racing so hard that it's just hard to focus or think straight. So if you've had any of these experiences, then what you might be dealing with is your window of tolerance. So remember, the window of tolerance is just that zone or range that you can optimally function in. Think about it as that range in which you can experience a hard situation or a difficult emotion, and you're able to regulate your way through that instead of kicking into fight, flight, or freeze. We all have difficult emotions and difficult experiences, but sometimes our ability to regulate through that difficult emotion or situation becomes a little bit more than we can manage, and we start to feel stuck in that emotion. And sometimes it feels like we're either stuck on or stuck off. And when that happens, we are outside of our window of tolerance. So again, with window of tolerance, we're looking at that zone that we can optimally regulate and function in without flipping into fight or flight or freeze mode. And with that, we're looking at either hyperarousal or hypoarousal. So once we get outside of that window of tolerance and we go from our prefrontal cortex back into our amygdala, we get activated and we start to lose access to our prefrontal cortex. And that's where executive function and wise decision making is. And of course, those are things that we really need when we're in the middle of a game or an athletic performance. And when we start to get outside of our window of tolerance and we start to not be able to regulate, we get too stuck in one of our emotions, then we don't have access to those things, and that impacts our game. So what we really need to do is learn to stay in our window of tolerance and regulate effectively. Again, it's not about the emotions that you experience, it's about how you regulate through the emotions that you experience. So take anger. Anger is one of the things that can happen when we get too high above our window of tolerance and we go into hyperarousal. And again, we can have anger and regulate well through it, but there's also anger that we flip too high. And so take, for example, a call that's made out on the field that you disagree with, and naturally you get angry about it. So your choices are to either regulate through that, or if your anger is outside of your window of tolerance, then it might feel like you're hijacked by that emotion, and that anger will grow increasingly bigger, and you start to lose access to that prefrontal cortex where you can think clearly and decision make in wise ways, which will negatively impact your game. I also want to take a minute to mention coaches. So if you have a coach who doesn't stay within their window of tolerance, where they either get above in hyperarousal or below in hypoarousal, it can make it very hard for individual players or for the team as a whole to stay within their window of tolerance. And because our nervous systems are designed to regulate and co-regulate off of one another, if a coach is dysregulated, it is very hard for his or her players to stay regulated as well. And I've talked about this in other window of tolerance videos. When we're in any sort of people helping profession or leadership or supervisory position, it calls us to constant work on ourselves, because our ability or inability to regulate through hard emotions or difficult situations really impacts those around us. And so if you're a coach watching this, this is part of your work in being a good coach, is to not only learn about the window of tolerance so that you can help your individual players, but so that you can continue to widen that window of tolerance as well. And that way you can be a healthy co-regulator for your players if they start to get a little dysregulated or a situation happens out on the field or the court that gets them outside of their window of tolerance. If you are a player and you have a coach who regularly is outside of their window of tolerance, I hope that this will normalize this a little bit for you and maybe help give an explanation for why you might hit into panic or hypervigilance or anxiety or just kind of freeze and go into shutdown mode when someone's nervous system across from us is dysregulated, and that can not only trigger off things that have happened in our past where someone else has been outside of their window of tolerance, but it can be really hard for us to regulate within ours as well. When we talk about the window of tolerance, what can we do within athletic programs? What can you as athletes do to work with your window of tolerance so that you can really boost your athletic performance within that window of tolerance? And for coaches, what can you do to integrate the window of tolerance and widening that window of tolerance in a healthy way for individual members of your team, as well as for the team as a whole, so that you can boost athletic performance? So my first recommendation would be that we need program-wide psychoeducation on what the window of tolerance is, how that impacts our nervous system, and what it looks like when we get above or below it, what hyperarousal or hypoarousal looks like. And I think it's really important for this to be system-wide, because every individual person's window of tolerance is going to look different. And so those things that act as the activating events that kick us off and get us outside of our window of tolerance are going to be a little bit different for each person. So to have team-wide or athletic department-wide conversations about this window of tolerance, A, normalizes it, because everyone has a window of tolerance and we're all going to get above or below it sometimes. But B, it allows us to then create individualized plans for players on what that can actually look like, and how each person not only gets triggered in gameplay, but also maybe gets triggered outside of the game that is impacting the game. We really want to normalize this so that we're not creating shame for mental health in the same way that there's not shame for physical health. This program-wide education could also involve mindfulness training and understanding how to get present in your body and what those individual body-based cues and shifts look like. If we start to move outside of our window of tolerance and we can catch that early on, then it doesn't have the chance to hijack us and really flip us too high or too low. And again, anything we can do within athletic performance to keep our prefrontal cortex engaged is just a benefit for athletic performance, whether that's for the individual or for the team as a whole. If you are interested in learning more about your nervous system and how that impacts threats and perceptions of threat within the athletic world, or again, widening that window of tolerance, make sure to go find those playlists, and there's a lot more content there for you. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Poland & Associates, and my website, polandassociates.com, and make sure that you subscribe to this channel so that you won't miss future videos.